After laying what some of the problems are, what we need is NRC in action. Oops. NRC in action, sorry. Okay. And we need NRC, we need 3 words. NRC in action is what we need. It's difficult to get. I've worked for UCS for 14 years, and it's very difficult. And having worked for the NRC, one of the problems I left was that there wasn't enough action. It wasn't stress that was a problem, it was shelf life. It's not real strenuous work working for the NRC. This is a schematic of a pressurized water reactor. What I want to talk about here is some of the safety problems the NRC knows about that they're not fixing at U.S. reactors, putting you in elevated risk. They've known about it. This first problem I'm going to talk about, they first warned the president about it a few years ago. The president they warned was Jimmy Carter, and the problem has still not been fixed. It's not Jimmy Carter's fault, I believe it's the NRC's fault. The problem is, in a pressurized water reactor, if a pipe breaks that's connected to the reactor vessel, the water inside the cooling the reactor escapes through the broken pipe very rapidly. The initial response for the system is to put a high-pressure tank of water that has nitrogen pressure above it that rapidly injects that water into the piping to replace the water that's escaping out through the broken pipe. That initial makeup water gives enough time for the pumps to automatically start on the left to transfer water from a tank out back into the reactor vessel to replace the water that's flowing out both ends of the broken pipe. At some point that tank outside is going to empty, so the next step is to take the water that's collecting in the basement of the reactor and send that through the same pumps, just realign where they're getting their water, to send that back in to cool the reactor. It spills out through the broken pipe, ends back up in the basement. You just recycle that water to cool the reactor. The problem that the NRC's known about is that the violence of water jetting out the broken ends of the pipe scours paint off walls, coating insulation off piping, and any other loose material in the way, and carries it down into the basement where it clogs the screens, just like here in a bathtub drain, and the water stays in the tub instead of getting to the pumps. The NRC knows about that since they warned President Carter in 1978. This is an NRC study of what's the chances of this happening at the 69 pressurized water reactors in the United States. The red boxes, according to the Sandia National Lab, is very likely to cause a reactor meltdown at U.S. reactors. I'll speed this up a second. A mere 53 of the 69 reactors are very likely to have this meltdown if there's an accident. 53 out of 69 since 1978. The good news is that the NRC has asked plant owners to fix this problem, giving a toaster oven to the first one who did it. Which turned out to be Davis-Besse for other reasons. But many of the reactors are now fixed. They've put larger screens inside the containment so it takes more debris to clog it. At the same time, they've replaced the paint and the coatings and the other materials inside containment to make it less susceptible to be broken up and carried down into the containment. So those reactors that have fixed the problem have really lessened the likelihood that that problem exists. However, there are 20 reactors that have just said no. Followed Nancy Reagan's edict and just said no. And the NRC has said, please? And the NRC, no, sorry. We're trying to get the NRC to get those 20 reactors to fix this problem that many other reactors have fixed, and hoping in the meantime that this doesn't happen at the plant in your backyard, because it's very likely that it won't work. But that's only if it fails. Earlier than President Carter being warned, there was a fire at the Browns Ferry plant in Alabama that was owned and operated by the Tennessee Valley Authority. A worker using a candle to look for air leaks started a fire, as candles have been known to do. Mrs. O'Leary's cow has an alibi, but the worker using a candle to look for air leaks started a fire that was in the room just below the control room. All the cables from the control room passed through this room right below the control room and then went out to various equipment in the plant. So the plant had all of its electricity, but all the cables between the controls in the control room and the equipment in the field was lost. Unit 1 at Browns Ferry lost all of its emergency equipment. The fire damaged all the cables. Unit 2 lost most of the safety systems due to the fire. So the NRC said, this is too close. They adopted rules in May of 1980 to prevent the next Browns Ferry. This is the NRC's list of plants that don't meet those regulations and don't meet an alternative set of regulations that the NRC adopted in 2004, saying, could you please meet one of the set of regulations? Just say no. 50 reactors in the United States, roughly half the fleet, are not protected in case of a fire for regulations that were adopted 3 decades ago. NRC in action. And ironically, one of the plants that doesn't meet the regulations is Browns Ferry in Alabama. It started it all. It has absolutely no excuse, but they don't meet it. Doesn't need to explain, but roughly a decade ago, we suffered 9/11. The NRC after 9/11 imposed security requirements for plants to meet to make their plants less vulnerable to acts of malice. Today, the NRC knows that there are several plants that don't meet those regulations. Their owners have said, can we have more time? Apparently, we're waiting for terrorists to retire, is our new safety protection system. I just assume that if we identify security shortcomings, we go out there and fix them. We don't put them on a list and ask and beg and coax the plant owners to meet the safety security regulations. It'd be nice if the NRC enforced its own regulations. NRC in action. Arnie and I were going to talk about some of the things that have been done at other places to try to address some of these issues. About 12 years ago, the NRC appointed me to a Federal Advisory Committee Act panel. That's an advisory body legally chartered to look at specific activity. In this case, it was the reactor oversight process. There was a number of industry representatives, a number of NRC officials. There were a number of state officials on the panel, and there was a token NGO, a token public member of the public serving on that panel to look at how the NRC's pilot reactor oversight process was working. The good news about that panel was that it was a consensus panel, so even every member's view had to be reflected in the final outcome. It wasn't a majority-minority report. So when they did the follow-up study, they could change it to a majority-minority point, so it didn't matter what I said anymore. But at least on the initial one, it was a good oversight process. And the reason I think there might be some value in this going forward is if the NRC established a similar panel to look at lessons learned from Fukushima and how they're implementing them, we think it'd be valuable to have public represented on that panel. We'd like to see at least one member from a local group, from a regional group in Region 1, Pilgrim Watch, C10 or somebody. Also Region 2, the Southeast, the West, and the Midwest. The public at the moment doesn't fully trust the NRC for some reason. And it would be good to have public representative, to have the public's concerns brought forth to the NRC and have the NRC's actions or explanations for justifications for whatever they're doing or not doing reported back to the. So I think that partnership would be better than the current system, so that there has some value going forward. Let Arnie talk about, he was the chair of a panel